Boys, we out here getting college credit to play and talk about video games, and you best know I'm gonna take advantage of it and make an entire video around the objectively best game ever developed, Hitman 2016, aka Hitman TM. Also, Hitman TM2 is gonna be part of this narrative as well, since it's more or less an extension of the first game. Now, I know what you're thinking, dear viewer. What is Hitman TM and Hitman TM2? Hitman is a game created by developer IO Interactive, the first being designed by Jesper Heiling and directed by Christian Elverdam, Jacob Mikkelsen, and Ryan Bernard. Elverdam and Mikkelsen returned to direct the 2018 sequel, with P. Andreas Crow as the lead game designer for that one. In Hitman, the player takes control of Agent 47, a stoic clone man, skilled assassin, and sentient egg that can be purchased as a standalone product from the full carton.
169.
The Hitman series particularly emphasizes stealth, mercy on bystanders, and creative problem solving. Because of their open-ended nature, these reboot games in particular make for great discussion grounds for many game design and narrative design elements, including mechanics, player agency, interactivity, interactive storytelling, choices, characters, emergent gameplay, the two storytelling methods of interactive media, etc.
A bit unorthodox, maybe, but you got the job done.
But, like, what even is a game, man?
And there are plenty of varying definitions, all of which are lofty and abstract as shit, but for today we're going to use the word game as described by game designers Katie Salen and Eric Zimmerman. A game is a system in which players engage in an artificial conflict defined by rules that result in a quantifiable outcome. Breaking this down piece by piece, the software of the game, from how it runs to how it reacts to the player and such, acts as the system of the game. The players may seem obvious to identify as just the gamer playing the game, controller, keyboard, and mouse in hand. But in fact, the game itself acts as a player acting in opposition to you, the player's goals. The obstacles the opposing player presents, aka the game itself, are then presented to you, the player, as an enemy or challenge to solve, thus creating artificial conflict. Rules dictate not only how one maintains or loses points for playstyle, but also apply to implied rules that constrain the rest of the game as well. Such examples of this include 47's inability to aim his gun at another character without attracting unwanted attention, or the limiting of the jump functionality to available walls that you can vault or climb over, or just, I don't know, his inability to just sprout wings and oh shit, look at that. The quantifiable outcome of a game of Hitman consists of a final mission score, the unlock of challenges, but also the simple completion of a match. Thusly, with the evidence I've given, I am putting an end to the debate that has long plagued the Hitman franchise. Hitman and Hitman 2 are indeed games. I imagine not all will accept my controversial findings, but the facts speak for themselves. Now, I'd like to talk about the anatomy of game elements and game choice, and how these are different from yet interplay with game mechanics. Raf Koster describes each game atom as consisting of 4 characteristic steps: input, model, feedback, then mastery. At a basic level, in Hitman, if the player presses forward on the thumbstick, input, the game then calculates this to mean that the player wishes to look in the direction the thumbstick is angled, model. The game then presents the player with an animation of 47 walking forward, giving the player visual feedback to the consequence of their actions. The player then learns that moving the thumbstick forward will move 47 forward in relation to the game camera, thus giving some level of mastery. In Salen and Zimmerman's rules of play, they apply these decisions to decision making. In Hitman, up on the D-pad hides or reveals an equipped item, and according to Salen and Zimmerman, the decision on whether or not to do this is influenced by previous circumstances leading to the choice, as well as how the possibility of a choice is presented to the player. If an item is illegal for 47 to be carrying, a bright red exclamation point will indicate the possible consequences of the choice the player makes. The decision will also result in a consequence, in this case alerting the surrounding characters, and will indicate the result of said choice presented to the player. In this case, a big musical cue, exclamations over the witness's head, and the word compromised in big ol' yellow above the minimap. This decision leads to yet another decision, and so on and so forth. These are only micro decisions, one that build into larger macro decisions, a concept explored by, again, Salen and Zimmerman. The fundamental steps of these are the same, but consist of a string of micro decisions. On a macro level, I here decided to play a silent assassin run through the map while dressed as Santa, which was in turn built by a multitude of smaller individual decisions, such as when to move and where, who to incapacitate and when, deciding not to change outfits, etc. But moving on to narrative, in The Art of Game Design, A Book of Lenses, designer Jesse Schell describes the two narrative models that video games generally follow: the string of pearl methods and the story machine. String of pearls is an easy enough concept to understand and is probably the most widely used method in game design. The idea is that a non-interactive story is presented to the player in a fixed way, most often in the form of a cutscene, aka the string.
Is now reportedly working on a far more disturbing project.
The player is then given control over the game with a fixed objective in mind, aka the pearl. While the player has some free reign, they must always complete a fixed objective before continuing on to the next string, which will then give the player the next pearl, and so on and so forth. And we can very easily see this in Hitman. The player is given a cutscene before being dropped into the map with the goal of killing the given targets before being presented with another cutscene. The cutscene doesn't change based on how you've dressed, how you escaped, or what method is used to eliminate the targets. In an article on Gamasutra, Josh Beiser describes player agency as the player's ability to impact the story through the game design or gameplay. By this measure, Hitman offers practically no agency. There's no alternate cutscenes based on how the player interacts with the game design. The exploits of 47 between missions are set in stone. The story machine, on the other hand, is more like a large set of rules and mechanics that a player interacts with to create an interesting sequence of events unique to their play, thereby generating a story. Interestingly, I'd highly argue that Hitman is very much a story machine as well. While the way Schell phrases the distinction between these two types of game narrative design makes String of Pearls and Story Machine games seem like two distinct entities, Hitman shows that there can be quite a bit of overlap. Game mechanics are described by the knowledge guru Sharon Bowler as the rules in which both the player and the game itself follows. An example of a game mechanic within Hitman is the ability to throw objects. By holding the left trigger, the player has the ability to lock onto the head of the character they are facing, and if they press the right trigger, 47 will throw whatever object he is holding at them. These are rules given to the player. But what happens after is determined by the object that 47 is holding. Soft objects like snowballs or blueberry muffins will knock a character over. Blunt objects like wrenches, baseballs, or propane tanks will knock a character out. And sharp objects like shurikens, cleavers, or katanas will kill a character instantly. These are the rules that the game itself must follow and determine the effect an object has on a character based on its state. In Ralph Koster's A Theory of Fun for Game Design, Koster asserts that we find fun in the act of learning. And given how extensively I just wrote about a single mechanic in Hitman, there's understandably a lot that a player can learn. What makes Hitman so fun is the sheer amount of mechanics at play, how they all feed into one another to some capacity, and the variation that these systems are allowed in such vast spaces. These variations are the biggest piece of the story machine model, and are what Salen and Zimmerman refer to as spaces of possibility. But going even further than that is what Josh Beiser calls emergent gameplay. Beiser describes this as a title where the mechanics afford the player to create new strategies and utility beyond their original intent or utilization. To do this, Beiser says that a game must be a structured sandbox with two key elements: tools that can be combined in both expected and unexpected ways, and goals that are open-ended enough to reward different playstyles and creative problem solving. And Hitman has these in spades. For each level, there are multiple mission stories, which are structured sequences of events that the developers explicitly designed so that the player can follow a more traditional sequence of narrative events. In one such mission story on the map Sapienza, 47 can overhear a therapist talking over the phone about his patient and 47's target, Silvio Caruso.
I'll have young Silvio calm and serene in no time.
If the player decides to follow this narrative thread to the end, the player will incapacitate the therapist in some fashion, steal his clothes to take his identity, and follow a string of guards and mansion staff to Caruso's room, where the player is left alone with the target and can smother him with a pillow.
Target down. Next up, Francesca DeSantis.
But this is by no means the only method to kill Caruso. Another story mission has the player deliver flowers to Caruso to get him isolated when he's mourning his mother. Another has the player disguise as a newly hired kitchen hand and poison the target's food with expired spaghetti sauce, causing him to puke over the side of a precariously steep and conveniently discreet cliff. List goes on. In fact, the spaghetti sauce that's used to poison Caruso's food for the mission story doesn't even have to be used to poison his food. In fact, the can of sauce doesn't even have to be used as poison. It's also a small blunt melee item, meaning that it can be concealed and stacked on 47's person, thrown as an audible distraction, hucked over to a character to knock him out from a distance, or used in close combat to quickly take down enemies. And who says you even need an objective item like the spaghetti sauce? Bring a suitcase holding a high-powered sniper rifle with you, find a good vantage point, and blast away. IO Interactive gives players a concrete objective to kill the target and presents the player with designed ways to go about it, but does not force the player into any one method of pulling this off, nor do these methods exist in a bubble. These player choices fall into the category of what Sebastian Domsch calls the actively nodal forms of narration. These include things like player actions, QTEs, dialogue trees that are not present in this game per se, and event triggers, or things that happen in the game world that the player supposedly naturally stumbles upon, like a conversation that has pertinent information triggered by the player's action or presence.
So we left the party. Now are you going to tell me who freaked you out back there?
But these emergent qualities of Hitman rely not only on active interactions, but what Domsch refers to as dynamic forms of narrative. These are game systems that change and run through their own processes independently of whether the player is there to see them or not. The key one at play in Hitman, and most other games, are the non-player characters. If one just observes an NPC do their thing without any player interference, you can see the AI take the character on a predetermined path or take specific actions, one that they'll continue if you're observing from far away or not even remotely paying attention to them. The NPC's actions can be interrupted by the player and then also become an actively nodal form because of the player's active altercation of their path. And the NPC will in turn change their behavior dynamically. And because there are so fucking many NPCs in each map, placement of each in relationship to one another is constantly shifting and can lead to unexpected, emergent moments in gameplay, such as an NPC unexpectedly bumping into 47, dragging a body around while following their path independently. And while there is oh so much to play around with and different viable paths for the player to take, the narrative does encourage a certain level of stealth and restraint. Despite being a mostly emotionless contract killer, the Agent 47 shown in the non-interactive narrative cutscenes is applied to be a master at being unseen, unheard, and minimizing any casualties other than his targets. The gameplay reflects this philosophy. Loud, open combat is incredibly difficult, and every time 47 either kills a non-target or is seen doing something he shouldn't, points are deducted at the end of the mission. While the mission starts in a seemingly vignette style, over the course of each mission, a larger story unfolds and 47's targets reflect as much. This is how the String of Pearls narrative of Hitman manifests. And of course this part of the Hitman games is enjoyable enough, but The game shines brightest in its emergent elements and the stories it generates as a result. The developers, of course, realize this, steadily adding post-launch content like multi-tier escalation missions, time-dependent elusive contracts, challenges that unlock new cosmetics and tools, and an extensively robust contract creator that allows players to determine their own targets, set their own rules, and share their contracts with other players. And that's what makes Hitman so fun. The multitude of creative solutions to a single challenge, multiplied exponentially by the constant addition of even more new challenges. You know, I just realized that I started this thing very meme-ish and very quickly dropped that bit. Oops.